What if everything we thought we knew about Westeros, the battles, the kings, the betrayals, was just a cover for something far older, far darker? Ned Stark was never the kind of man to chase ghosts. Honor, justice, loyalty, these were the things that guided him. But ghosts had begun to chase him. It started as whispers in the wind, fragments of overheard conversations between old men in the Citadel, carried by raven and rumor alike. When Jon Arryn died, the truth was supposed to lie in the pages of a book. The seed is strong, they had said. But maybe that wasn't the only secret hidden in ink and dust. The journey to King's Landing had always felt heavy. Ned chalked it up to the burden of duty, the weight of being Hand of the King. But in his dreams, he began seeing something stranger. The burning tree of his youth, the crypts whispering in tongues he didn't understand, and Maesters with chains that didn't clink but hissed. He didn't speak of them, not even to Catelyn, not even to himself, really. When Maester Pycelle came to him with that same sluggish, measured tone, offering milk of the poppy for his aching leg, Ned declined. He hadn't trusted Pycelle since the man had spoken too fondly of Aerys. The Mad King was thorough, Pycelle had said, with eyes that didn't match his words. That was when Ned first suspected something was wrong, but it was Varys, the Master of Whispers, who brought him the key. Not out of loyalty, never that. Varys had his own games, but he had come to Ned under the guise of concern. The Citadel, he whispered, does not merely record the history of Westeros, Lord Stark, it edits it. Ned wanted to walk away. He had enough to deal with. Robert's recklessness, the Lannisters plotting, Littlefinger's oily grins. But he couldn't let it go. Not when Varys handed him a parchment from the Black Cells. A prisoner had been held there, an old man babbling about dragons and weirwoods, magic and murder. His name had been erased, but his writings remained. Pages filled with curses against the Maesters and warnings of their long war against magic. At first Ned thought it madness, but the coincidences piled too high. The death of the last known green seer beyond the wall, the poisoning of Summerhall during a magical ritual, the purge of the Targaryens who once rode dragons, each one linked in some way to the Citadel. He confronted Pycelle. Not directly. Ned was not a fool, but he tested him, asked about ancient magics, about the children of the forest. Pycelle waved it off. Superstition, he said. Fairy tales to scare the small folk. And yet, there was fear in his eyes when he spoke of it. That night, Ned ordered the crypts of Winterfell to be sealed tighter and sent ravens not to his bannermen, but to the surviving lords of the North who still followed the old gods. The North remembered. And so did its guards. He began asking questions no one asked anymore. He spoke to the city's less noticed folk, the rat-catchers, the candle-makers, the mute girl in the kitchens who had once seen Pycelle feeding something to a raven that glowed faintly green. Bit by bit, the puzzle emerged. The Citadel for centuries had waged a quiet war, not for crowns but for control. Control of knowledge, of belief, of truth itself. They had worked in shadows, advising kings, prescribing rationality, and dismissing anything that could not be weighed or measured. Dragons were monsters, green seers were madmen, and magic. Just coincidence misunderstood, but too many things had vanished. Too many bloodlines had ended just before their gifts matured. Too many texts had been lost in suspicious fires. Ned was a man of honor, not paranoia. But even he could no longer deny the pattern. When he looked back on Jon Snow's mother, on Lyanna's crypt and her final words, he wondered. Was there more? Was Rhaegar trying to awaken something, not just steal a woman? Had the Maesters sabotaged more than politics? One night, Maester Luwin, loyal servant of House Stark, visited Ned in secret. His hands trembled. I am not like the others, he said. I came to serve, not to erase, but there is truth in what you fear. The Maesters of Oldtown, they have a doctrine. They call it the doctrine of unbinding. They believe magic is a disease. They've spent centuries curing it, Ned asked. How? Luwin's voice dropped. Through marriage, poison, assassination, lies. They counsel weak kings, isolate powerful bloodlines. They sabotaged Valyria. They worked with the faith to burn scrolls from Ashai. They even stole the horn. The horn? Ned asked. The horn of winter. The one that wakes giants and brings down the wall. Ned felt the chill in his bones. The wall is not just stone, Luwin said. It is a seal. They fear it breaking, Because they fear what's beyond. Not the dead, no, not just them. The truth, Ned could no longer sleep. He moved through the Red Keep like a man haunted, because he was. The Masters, the Lords, even Robert himself, they were all pieces on a board he'd never seen before. And now he had to choose, stay quiet, protect his family, or speak the truth and risk everything. The irony wasn't lost on him. All his life he had believed in law, order, and the counsel of wise men. But now he saw the chains Maesters wore for what they truly were. Not symbols of service, but shackles of control. So Ned sent one final raven. Not to Stannis, not to Renly, but to Howland Reed. Because if there was one man who knew what the world had tried to bury, it was him. In the darkness of the crypts that night, Ned stood before Lyanna's tomb and whispered, "I was wrong. It wasn't just about Jon, it was about all of it. They're still hiding it, but not for long." And somewhere in Old Town a raven took flight, but the Citadel was already watching. The raven never reached Howland Reed. Somewhere between the lands of the Reach and the Neck it vanished. No trace, no feathers, no sign of interception. Ravens don't simply disappear, especially not the ones bound with Lord Stark's seal. Ned sensed the truth before it was confirmed. The Citadel had eyes everywhere. They didn't need armies. They had silence, patience, and time. In King's Landing, Maester Pycelle remained calm, but Ned noticed the small changes. The way his eyes lingered longer. How his replies became slower, more measured. The Citadel knew he was looking. And they were warning him. Ned didn't scare easily. But this was different. This wasn't like jousts or Lannister plots, or even Targaryen madness. This was ancient, layered, and vast. And worst of all, no one believed him. Robert was drunk half the day. And when Ned tried to bring up the horn, the dragons, the strange deaths, the king had laughed. "You always had a dark imagination." "Ned, you sure you're not spending too much time with Varys?" Varys had gone quiet too. He'd warned Ned once, and that had been enough. The Spider had no love for the Citadel, but he loved survival more. So Ned turned inward. He met with Luwin again, but only under moonlight. Together they reviewed the oldest letters and scrolls that had made it out of Old Town unburnt. Many were half-faded, translated from High Valyrian, or fragments from beyond the Shivering Sea. One message was constant. Magic had once been common. The land was alive with it. Children of the forest had walked in daylight. Wargs had ruled the north. Dragons flew not as weapons of war, but as living gods. But it had all withered. Not from natural decay, but deliberate sabotage. "I used to believe magic faded because men stopped believing," Luwin whispered. "But now I wonder if men stopped believing because they were told to forget, told to doubt." Ned's thoughts kept drifting back to Jon, to the truth he had hidden beneath lies. If Jon was who he suspected, then he was more than just Rhaegar's son. He was fire and ice, blood and prophecy. And that meant the Citadel would want him dead. The thought broke something in him. Catelyn noticed it first. The way he'd started checking the windows at night. The unspoken tension when he looked at Sansa and Arya. He had already lost too much. He wouldn't lose his children to a war they couldn't see. So he moved faster. He began writing pages and pages. Not just letters to allies, but records, a full account of everything he had discovered. Names, theories, suspicions, timelines. If he was right, this wasn't a conspiracy against a throne. It was a crusade against the soul of Westeros. And if he was wrong, then the truth would bury him. But at least someone would remember he tried. That's when he made his first mistake. He trusted Littlefinger. It wasn't a big ask, just a courier, someone to deliver a sealed packet north without drawing attention. Littlefinger smiled, nodded, and took the scrolls with his usual smirking charm. Ned should have known better. He had known better. By the time he realized the betrayal, it was too late. The information never left the city. Instead, a fire broke out in a side room of the Tower of the Hand. They said it was an accident. A candle left too close to a curtain. But Ned knew. The flames had eaten through his pages, but not his memory. He would not be silenced. With Luwin's help, he traced the history of the chain links worn by Maesters. Each metal meant a different discipline. But there was one chain that hadn't been used in centuries, black iron forged in dragonflame. Forbidden knowledge. According to Luwin, only one man had worn it in the last 300 years, Marwyn the Mage. "Some say he still lives," Luwin told him. exiled from Old Town, studying things they want forgotten. If I find him, Ned asked, would he help? Lewin didn't answer at first. Then, he might burn the world to expose the truth. Ned didn't flinch. Good. But before he could act, chaos struck. Robert was dead. A boar, they claimed. But Ned had heard rumors of sweet wine laced with strange herbs, poison that made men bold, reckless, and blind to pain. The same wine Pycelle had recommended for the king's hunting trip. With Robert gone, Joffrey took the throne. And suddenly everything spiraled. Ned tried to move quickly, to name Stannis, to challenge the succession. But the Lannisters moved faster. His arrest was sudden, brutal. His own men slaughtered in the halls of the Red Keep. Ned was dragged to the dungeons. Bloodied, broken, but not silent, even in chains. He whispered to the dark. They know, he murmured. The Maesters. They've been cutting out the roots of magic for centuries. They want fire dead. They want ice tamed. The Black Cells offered no reply. But Ned was not alone. Down in the depths, in the silence of the stone walls, a prisoner responded. A woman, ragged, half-mad but not broken. You've seen it too, she said. The pattern, the rot. They called me mad when I spoke of the children in the woods. When I said I could still hear the trees whisper. Ned crawled to the bars. Who are you? He asked. I was a lady once, she replied. From House Blackwood. I followed the old gods. I dreamed in weirwood. Her eyes flickered. I saw a red star fall. I saw a baby born with dragon's blood and wolf's heart. I saw chains. Breaking. Ned's heart pounded. She reached through the bars, touched his hand. They will kill you, she whispered. But your death will be a fire starter. They can burn your words, but they can't burn your bloodline. Ned didn't understand. Not fully. But he understood enough. In his final days, he wrote again, not on scrolls, but into memory. He whispered everything to Varys, knowing the spider would preserve it. He trusted no one, but in that moment he gambled. On truth. On legacy. When the axe fell, Ned Stark died, but he died knowing one thing. The war wasn't for a throne. It was for reality itself. The streets of King's Landing buzzed with morbid joy the morning after Ned Stark's execution. His head sat on a spike above the Red Keep, a grim warning to all who might challenge the boy king. But what the people didn't know, what the Lannisters didn't see, what even Varys feared, was that something had begun the moment his life ended, and not even the Citadel could stop it. Far to the north, the ravens that had once gone silent began to fly again. In Winterfell, Maester Lewin received a sealed scroll written in an unfamiliar hand. It wasn't addressed to any lord or bannerman, but to Meera Reed, daughter of Howland. The ink was fresh, and the seal had no sigil, only a carved weirwood leaf stained in dried blood. Lewin stared at the message for hours before delivering it. When Meera opened it, her hands trembled. The letter spoke of a secret, of magic buried beneath the neck, of Ned Stark's suspicions, of something the Citadel had feared for centuries, something only the Crannogmen had preserved. The last dreamer, it read, still breathes in the swamp. Howland Reed had not been seen in years. Some claimed he'd gone mad. Others whispered he had become more tree than man. But Meera didn't care. She strapped her blade to her hip and left without a word. The old gods were stirring, and her father held the missing piece. Meanwhile, in Old Town, the Citadel responded. Archmaester Vaelin, keeper of history and rumoured whisperer of darker things, called a silent meeting. No bells, no ravens, no records. 9 archmasters gathered in a candle-lit stone chamber beneath the library tower, their chains clinking like snakes in the dark. The wolf knew too much, one said. And now he is dead, another replied. But he left seeds, Vaelin rasped, and they are beginning to bloom. Burn them. We tried, we failed. Now we must contain. They turned to the Book of Unbinding, an ancient volume never shown to acolytes, filled with spells masked as philosophy, rituals written as riddles. Within its pages was a list of bloodlines, families touched by fire or frost, greenseers, wargs, dreamers, skin changers, dragon lords. One name had been circled in red ink centuries ago, Stark. Ned's death was meant to silence that bloodline. But they had overlooked Jon Snow. The Citadel did not yet know his true parentage, but they knew enough to fear what he might become. And so the order was given, find the boy. Watch him, shape him, or destroy him, But by then, Jon had already taken the Black. At Castle Black, Jon stood on the wall, wind screaming around him, eyes scanning the icy horizon. He hadn't spoken much since his father's death. Something inside him had hardened, not just from grief, but from a strange feeling that Ned had died with words still unspoken. A truth buried under honor. Samwell Tarly noticed it. He tried to talk to Jon, to pull him from the silence. But Jon's dreams had begun to change. He saw trees bleeding, wolves howling beneath a red sky, ravens with 3 eyes, and chains, long black chains wrapping around the wall like serpents. One night he woke with a scream. Ghost stood over him, growling at the shadows. Sam sat up, frightened. "You were saying something. In your sleep. Over and over." "What was I saying?" Sam hesitated. "You said, 'The fire's not dead. The wolf remembers. The storm is coming back.'" Jon didn't remember, but his bones felt it. Far to the south, in the ruins of Summerhall, another fire flickered back to life. A young girl with silver hair, Daenerys Targaryen, stepped from the ashes of Khal Drogo's funeral pyre. 3 dragons coiled around her shoulders. The world called it a miracle, but in Old Town it was called a catastrophe. "The flame lives," Archmaester Vaelin whispered, gripping his chain so tightly his palm bled. "And now the wolf and dragon rise in the same generation." He turned to a silent figure beside him, a Maester with no name, who spoke only through ink and candlelight. "Send the signal," Vaelin hissed. "It's time to unmake the bindings." Meanwhile, Arya Stark was on the run. Yoren had smuggled her out of the city, cutting her hair, dressing her as a boy. But even in disguise, she saw the world differently now. She remembered her father's head. She remembered the silence that followed the crowd's roar. And she remembered the one man who hadn't looked away, Maester Pycelle. Before he died, Ned had tried to tell her something. He'd whispered it while held at sword point, just before Ser Ilyn brought the blade down. A single word. Remember. Arya didn't know what he meant. Not yet. But something inside her began to sharpen. She'd always thought swords were the answer. Now she wasn't so sure. She began to notice the Maesters. How they were always there, watching, advising, guiding. They moved between castles like ghosts. And wherever they stayed, strange things happened. A wildfire stockpile would suddenly spoil. A pregnant woman claiming to dream of dragons would mysteriously lose the child. An old lord with visions of the past would fall ill, struck dumb by a stroke. Arya had always hated secrets, but now she began to seek them. In Harrenhal she listened. In the Riverlands she watched. And in her dreams she heard the sound of chains, dragging, choking, clinking. By the time she crossed the narrow sea and reached Braavos, she wasn't just learning to kill. She was learning to listen. And the Faceless Men, Death's servants, had their own history with the Citadel. "They fear what they cannot chain," her mentor said once. And they cannot chain death. Not truly. Back in Old Town, the Citadel prepared its next move. A meeting was held with a Knight of the Faith militant. A quiet arrangement with the Iron Bank. And then at last a raven sent to the wall, not to warn but to test. Jon Snow was summoned. Not ordered, not requested, but invited to study. A rare honor. A master from Old Town would come to Castle Black personally. But Maester Aemon said no. He called the raven false. The seal was wrong. The ink was too fresh, and he recognized the style of the writing. It belonged to someone who had once tried to silence him long ago, when he was still a Targaryen prince in hiding. Jon listened carefully. The old man's voice was faint, but his words were steel. "They erased my brothers, my history. They wanted the dragon blood to go cold." He turned his blind eyes toward Jon. "But it burns in you. I can feel it. And they will come for you too." Jon wanted to ask more, but Aemon fell sick that night. A sickness no one could name, a darkness no fire could warm. By morning he was gone, and Jon Snow was left with ghosts. Jon Snow was left with ghosts. Winterfell was silent, the kind of silence that feels wrong, like the calm before something ancient wakes up. Bran Stark could feel it, not just hear it, feel it, in his bones, in his dreams, in the way the weirwood tree outside whispered even when no wind touched its leaves. The dreams had started after his fall. At first they were just strange colors, symbols and shadows, but then faces began to appear. A man with golden eyes, a woman cloaked in feathers, wolves standing on 2 legs, chains, always chains, wrapped around towers, forests and necks. He didn't tell anyone at first. Maester Luwin had taught him to distrust dreams, to see the world through logic and study. Magic, the Maester had always said, belonged to the stories of old. But those stories lived in Bran's mind now. They clung to him like mist. And the truth was, Luwin had started to seem afraid. He had changed after Ned's death. Something in him had cracked. Bran caught him burning old scrolls in the dead of night, scrolls that smelled like iron and pine. He said they were dangerous fictions. Bran didn't believe that. Not anymore. One evening, Hodor carried Bran to the Godswood, where the red leaves glowed in the last light. Summer padded close, never straying too far from Bran's side. The boy placed his hand on the weirwood's face and whispered, "Why?" The wind answered, not with words, but with memory. A flash of green fire, a burning horn, a black raven with 3 eyes, and then his father's voice. "They are cutting the roots." Bran fell from Hodor's back in shock. Not a physical fall, but a tearing. He'd heard Ned, not imagined, not dreamed. He heard him. That night Bran demanded Maester Luwin tell him the truth, not the stories, not the facts, the truth. Luwin sat with his hands folded for a long time before speaking. There was a time, he said, when the world was young, and the North still whispered. Bran leaned forward. The Maesters were created to preserve knowledge, yes, but some knowledge they believed should never survive. So they began to choose which histories to write, which truths to bury. Why? Bran asked. Because magic is chaos, unpredictable, dangerous, it resists control. Hand the Maesters, at least the ones who sit in the deepest chambers of Old Town, they want order. Total order, Bran frowned. And my father? He found out. He suspected. But he died before he could stop them. Before he could protect you. Bran didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window watching the stars and felt something stir inside him. A pressure, a presence. The weirwood beyond the walls pulsed in his mind. And when he finally closed his eyes, he dreamed not of wolves or dragons, but of chains, melting in fire. In the dungeons of King's Landing, Varys moved like a shadow. The execution of Ned Stark had shifted the entire balance of the realm, but it had done more than that. It had woken something. The rumors filtering in from the east were impossible to ignore. Daenerys Targaryen had hatched dragons, real dragons. Living, breathing, flying fire. The Citadel went into panic. Maesters across the realm began reporting anomalies. Burned texts, cracked glass candles, bleeding trees. Ravens flying off course. Wildlings with glowing eyes. And then the dreams. Everyone was dreaming again. Varys had seen many things in his life. He had cut kings, poisoned lords, whispered empires into ruin. But this was something he couldn't control. He sent messages in code to spies he hadn't used in decades. Hidden agents who reported directly from Old Town. From deep within the Citadel, their news chilled him to the bone. The Maesters were activating Protocol Grey Flame. A purge. They had begun gathering lists, names of houses with rumored magical heritage, suspected skin changers, anyone connected to Valyria, the old gods or prophecy. The plan was to make them vanish, quietly, slowly, without fire or war, just silence, just history rewritten, just erasure. And Jon Snow was at the top of the list. At Castle Black, the wind howled differently. Jon stood at the top of the wall, the night freezing against his skin, ghost at his side. Ever since Maester Aemon's death he had felt alone, adrift, but more than that, watched. The new Maester sent to Castle Black didn't come from the Citadel directly, or so they claimed. He was young, eager, well-read, but something in his eyes made Jon uneasy. He would speak of strange things, of how the old stories were all metaphor, how magic was an invention of desperate men, how dragons were just beasts, not miracles. Jon began testing him. What do you know of the Horn of Winter? The Maester smiled too quickly. A myth. What about greenseers? Children's tales. And dragon blood? The Maester hesitated. A superstition. Fire is fire, Lord Snow. It burns the same in all men. But Jon knew better now. He had started feeling things. Moments when the world seemed to slow. When Ghost would lock eyes with him and something inside him shifted. He hadn't told anyone yet, but he had seen through Ghost's eyes once, and it terrified him. Not because it was unnatural, but because it felt right. Across the sea, Daenerys burned Ardcorth, Astapor, Yunkai. Each city she left smoldering. The dragons grew, and so did the whispers, but so did the resistance. She noticed it in the way healers refused to treat her sick. How her advisors suddenly fell ill, the poisoned wine at Yunkai, the betrayal of the sellswords, the Red Priestess who turned to ash overnight. Someone was hunting her, not with armies but with silence. Jorah brought word from Westeros. "The Citadel has named you Anomaly 0. That was all the message said. She didn't know what it meant, but she could feel it, something ancient, cold, and patient had turned its eye upon her. In Braavos, Arya finished her training. The House of Black and White taught her many things: faces, death, silence. But the Faceless Men had their own secrets. Once, late at night, Arya wandered where she was not meant to go, and found a chamber filled with strange glowing jars. One contained a face that whispered without speaking, a face of bone and fire. She touched it and saw a city of towers, a wall of black glass, dragons bound in iron, and a book, shut with a lock forged of Valyrian steel. When she pulled back, her nose was bleeding. "Some truths cut deeper than blades," her mentor said. "Watching from the shadows, what is the Citadel?" she asked. "A lie," he answered, "wrapped in truth. Forged in fear. The war for Westeros was no longer just for thrones, it was for memory, for fire, for the right to dream. And those dreams were waking, the chains were weakening, and in the shadows of history, the wolf and dragon would rise, whether the world was ready or not. The world was ready or not. The Citadel had always prided itself on being outside the games of kings, advisors, not actors, but that was the greatest lie of all. For centuries, they had shaped history more subtly than any sword could, and now that history was unraveling. In Old Town, the high tower that scraped the sky like a frozen spear began to hum, not with noise but with energy. Beneath its base, in chambers sealed for generations, the black glass candles burned again. 3 of them, one for fire, one for ice, and one that pulsed with a sickly green glow. None of the acolytes were allowed near. Only Archmaester Violin and 2 others, chosen in secret, guarded the flame. The glass candles had been dead since the doom of Valyria. That they now flickered back to life was no accident. It was a signal. The bindings were weakening, and when the bindings failed, magic would return, not quietly but violently. A storm was coming. They had failed to prevent Daenerys from hatching dragons. They had failed to intercept Jon Snow before his blood stirred with power, and they had lost control of the Stark boy, Bran, who now touched the weirwood net with every breath he took. But worst of all, the Citadel had begun to fracture from within. A young Maester named Elrin had broken his vows of silence and written a book called The Shattered Chain. In it, he laid bare the truth, how Maesters had manipulated bloodlines, suppressed magical knowledge, and guided the downfall of the Targaryens. It was a manifesto, a call to arms. The book was immediately banned. Elrin was declared insane, but his words had already spread. Hidden copies began appearing in Wintertown, in the alleys of King's Landing. Haven whispered about in the free cities. Knowledge, once buried, was now unchained. At the wall, Jon Snow received a raven. Its message was unsigned, written in careful script. He must not awaken. If he dreams, he becomes. If he becomes, the seal breaks. You are the seal. It made no sense at first. But as the days passed, Jon began to feel different. The wind spoke in voices only he could hear. Ghost disappeared for days at a time, then returned with frost on his fur and eyes that glowed brighter than before. And Jon's own dreams grew darker, deeper. He stood before the wall, not as a man, but as something more. His blood burned and froze all at once. He began to understand he wasn't just a Snow. He wasn't even just a Stark. He was something in between. Fire and ice. Order and chaos. The balance the Maesters feared, and they were moving against him. Samwell Tarly found it first, a book misfiled deep in the library, bound in strange leather. It detailed rituals performed by the early Maesters to silence the voices. The text claimed some were born too close to the source, born with the blood of the first men and Valyria both. If those bloodlines met and woke, the seals that held the old magics at bay could crack. Jon and Daenerys, Bran and the trees, Arya and the faces. Magic was reawakening not by accident, but because they were alive. And so the Citadel moved. A new command was issued. Project Eclipse. Wipe out the remainder. Destroy what you cannot contain. They didn't need armies. They had poison, paper, influence, the minds of kings and the ears of queens, and soon they would make their final play. In Meereen, Daenerys felt the pressure too. Her dragons grew restless. Dragon began disappearing into the night for days, coming back with wounds she couldn't explain. Visions plagued her sleep. Visions of ash, of wolves with wings, of a wall of fire crashing into a wall of ice. Jorah brought her another message from the west. A letter written in blood. They are coming for you, not with swords, with silence. With names forgotten and truths undone. Trust no healers. Burn every raven. The war you fight is not for a throne. It is for your soul. She asked who sent it. Jorah only said, someone who knew your brother. Daenerys didn't cry. She just fed the letter to the fire and ordered the Unsullied to prepare. Not for war, but for a journey. To Westeros, to home, to truth. In Winterfell, Bran stopped dreaming. He began seeing. He no longer needed sleep. The trees spoke to him in the day. Ravens lingered near his window watching. And in the crypts below the castle, the statues whispered in voices only he could hear. He reached into the weirwood and pulled history into his hands. He saw the moment Aegon landed. The moment the Maesters lied. He saw the horn shattered and buried beneath Summerhall. He saw a ceremony where the chains were blessed by the faith, forged in fear of the future. He saw Ned Stark die, but not broken. He saw him whisper to the wind, protect them. Bran wept. He sent ravens to Jon, to Arya, to Daenerys, to people who hadn't spoken in years, and when the ravens left his hands, their eyes glowed white. Arya was the first to receive it, a single phrase. They killed magic. But death remembers. She had never intended to return to Westeros, but now she had no choice. She boarded a ship under a false name, leaving behind the City of Faces. She carried no sword, no coin. Only her name, Arya Stark, daughter of the North. She was going home. At Castle Black, the Maester who had come after Aemon finally made his move. He slipped poison into Jon's drink. Not the kind that kills quickly, but one that paralyzes the mind. That steals the voice. That makes the soul retreat. But Ghost attacked first. The Maester died with his throat torn open, and Jon stood over his body. His eyes filled with flame and frost. He said nothing. He didn't need to. He understood now he was the seal. And he was about to break. In Old Town, the Citadel made its final move. They activated the Bell of Binding, a ritual used only once before, during the final days of the Doom. It would cut the ties between blood and flame, between tree and mind. If it succeeded, the world would sleep again. But Bran saw it, and he reached across the trees, across time, across memory, and he whispered, "No more chains." The bell cracked, the sky split, and in the dead of night, every glass candle in Old Town shattered. The Citadel had lost control, magic had returned, and Westeros would never be the same again. They called it the Night of Shattered Glass. Across the known world, Maesters awoke to find their glass candles split down the center, bleeding light and heat. The candles were never supposed to burn again, never. Their flame was meant to remain cold, like the history the Citadel clung to, sterile, lifeless, controlled. But now, something had changed. The black glass screamed as it split, and those who heard it, those attuned to the deeper currents of the world, fell to their knees. A scream not in the air but in the blood. Maesters across Westeros dropped dead where they stood. Some clawed at their own faces. Others vanished into madness. Those closest to the candles simply caught fire. In Old Town, the bell tower crumbled before it could finish ringing the ritual of binding. The ritual was broken, not disrupted, not delayed, but unmade. Bran had seen it in the weirwood net. He didn't stop the bell. He rewrote it. And now the tide had turned. The world didn't change slowly. It snapped. At Castle Black, Jon stood at the top of the wall, his cloak whipping in the wind. The Maester's attempted murder had failed, and Sam had found the sealed journal that bastard carried, full of Citadel orders, bloodline charts, and one chilling line, "Kill the dreamers." Bury the wolf. Jon didn't need a council. He didn't need the Lord Commander's seat. He only needed to decide, and he did. He rode south. No one tried to stop him. Some followed, and those who stayed behind looked up at the stars that night and saw them burning just a little brighter. The cold wasn't as cold. The dark no longer felt empty. Jon rode for Winterfell. But he also rode toward something else, something older than the wall, older than even the Citadel, dark truth. In the east, Daenerys saw the signs before she even landed. The dragons changed first. They grew restless, hungry for more than meat. Drogon flew higher and farther than ever before, circling above ships like a shadow of fire. He would land only for Daenerys, and when he looked at her, his eyes no longer reflected the sky. They reflected her. The fire within her grew wild. She began to hear things too. Not whispers, but songs. Echoes of languages she didn't speak. Old Valyrian, yes, but also the language of leaves, of bone, of wind through stone. The blood of the dragon didn't just stir, it howled. And with every howl, the chains the Citadel had cast centuries ago began to tremble. She landed in Dawn, not for conquest, but for a meeting. Arya Stark waited there. She had arrived 2 nights earlier, face unmasked, name declared. Daenerys didn't trust easily, but Arya didn't come with words. She came with a book, the shattered chain, smuggled by rebel Maesters and carried by a faceless hand across the narrow sea. Daenerys read in silence for hours. Then she stood, fire flickering behind her eyes. They tried to erase us, Arya nodded. They failed. Back in the north, Bran's body barely moved anymore. He sat beneath the weirwood tree in Winterfell for days on end, eyes pale, mouth silent, but his mind stretched further than any king, any crow, any blade ever had. He touched the past like a lover. He touched the future like a wound. He saw the moment the Citadel was founded, not as scholars, but as jailers. Their first act wasn't to build the library, but to burn a grove, a sacred grove where the old gods were said to speak. He saw the death of the last true greenseer, not from age, but from poison slipped into his cup by a kindly man with chains around his neck. He saw Valyria, flames rising not from chaos, but sabotage. The Maesters hadn't just watched the doom, they had helped it burn. Bran wept blood beneath the tree. He whispered to the roots, "Let it end," and the weirwoods heard him. Across Westeros, the trees awoke, leaves rustled without wind. Faces bled sap. The old gods whispered not just to the north, but to the riverlands. The Vale, even the Reach, and those who had once dreamed, those with traces of the gift, heard them. 1,000 sparks lit in a single night, skin changers, awakened, greenseers dreamed, and the dead things in the deep forests began to stir. In the ruins of Harrenhal, a girl with no face lit a fire. Arya had returned. Not alone. She met with those who remembered. An old crannogman with eyes like fog, a mute brother from the Quiet Isle, a wildling woman who dreamt in colors. Each carried a piece of the puzzle, and the pieces no longer fit the world the Maesters had crafted. They built a council, not of lords, but of truth-bearers. Their goal wasn't to rule. It was to remind, to restore, to unchain the forgotten magic that had once made Westeros sing. Arya called them the Boundless. Daenerys called them the Flameborn. Bran called them necessary. In the shadows of the Red Keep, Varys watched it all unfold. He had survived assassination attempts, poisonings, even a failed hanging. The Citadel had tried to kill him 4 times. But the spider always had one more thread, and now he pulled his last. He released every scroll, every secret, every stolen word he had kept hidden for years. Hundreds of letters went out to every house, every free city, every master's rookery. Names, crimes, bloodlines, the forbidden truth. The Citadel had erased half the world. Now Varys gave it back, and the world would never forget again. In Old Town, the Masters collapsed in chaos. The Tower of the Hand fell. The vaults of forbidden knowledge burst into flame. But the last surviving Archmaster, Vaelin, stood calmly amidst the fire. He whispered one final curse to a dying acolyte. Even broken chains can bind again. And then he stepped into the fire and vanished. No body was ever found. Some say he lives still, deeper than stone, plotting his revenge. Others say he joined the Black Glass. But none deny what followed. The magic returned. The dreams surged. The chains were broken. And from ice and fire came not just war, but awakening.